let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating analysis of a 2,000-year-old story. We're going to look closely at one of the most famous parables in human history to uncover what the source text suggests is a massive narrative loophole. We'll be viewing this ancient text through a highly structured spiritual lens to see if we can finally resolve a dilemma that has honestly troubled readers for centuries. So let's start with a core question that's right at the heart of this entire analysis. The source points out a major logical hurdle in how we traditionally understand this story. Think about it. If you can willfully leave home, live a life of complete wild recklessness, and then just return to get a massive, joyous, celebratory feast, well, what exactly is the incentive against acting that way in the first place? It's a question of balance, right? If a sudden return wipes the slate completely clean with a party, doesn't that seem just a bit unfair? To really grasp this dilemma, the source text first recaps the famous parable from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15. You probably know the basics. The younger son demands his share of the inheritance early, takes the wealth, goes off to a distant country, and squanders absolutely everything on some pretty wild living. Then a severe famine hits. He finds himself totally destitute, hitting rock bottom by feeding pigs just to survive. Finally, starving and coming to his senses, he's filled with regret. He crawls back home, asking to just be a hired servant. But instead, his father runs out, embraces him, and throws this lavish feast. Now, here is where things get really interesting. The source text draws our attention to a profound unfairness regarding the faithful older brother. Look at the contrast here. The younger son squandered his family's property, but returns only to receive the best robe, a ring, and the prized fattened calf. Meanwhile, the older son stayed. He slaved away in the fields for years, literally never disobeyed an order, and yet, as he points out, he was never even given a young goat to celebrate with his friends. The source highlights this stark side-by-side comparison to show a really distinct lack of overall balance. Naturally, the older brother is furious and refuses to join the party, so the father comes out to plead with him. And the father offers this famous response: "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." But the source text makes a super compelling argument here. Focusing solely on the father's forgiveness doesn't actually answer the older brother's grievance. This traditional biblical response simply doesn't sound adequate enough to balance the scales against the seemingly preferential treatment given to a son who caused so much heartbreak. Okay, moving into part 1, the missing rule, a spiritual perspective on cause and effect. So how on earth do we make sense of this? Well, to solve this fairness dilemma, the source text argues we have to introduce a spiritual framework, one that operates completely independently of the father's earthly emotional forgiveness. To do this, the text references a concept explained in the Grail Message of Abdrashan, the law of sowing and reaping. And this isn't just some nice metaphor. The source describes it as an absolute, inviolable law of creation. It operates to bring to each person, in precise measure, the exact consequences of their actions. We experience the direct results of what we sow. Because of this, the younger son's karmic debt, the heavy spiritual weight of his reckless actions, isn't magically erased by a welcome feast or a hug. The law demands balance. So the crucial point is understanding how forgiveness actually works under this inviolable law. The source breaks it down into steps. Step 1 is the recognition of error. The younger brother's deep regret is essential. It starts the forgiveness process. But look at step 2. The activity of sowing and reaping continues. The regret absolutely does not override the painful, ongoing consequences of his past actions. He must still reap what he sowed. And that leads to step 3, a lingering memory and deep inward shame that the spirit still has to work through over time. The source uses a brilliant analogy here, and it really hits the nail on the head. It compares spiritual forgiveness to kicking a severe habit or drug addiction. Think about it. Even after you quit, your body and mind still have to heal from the damage, sometimes for years. Similarly, just recognizing a spiritual error doesn't immediately eradicate the psychic memory or the inward shame. That stuff is etched into the spirit. To really emphasize the sheer weight of the psychic debt, the text introduces a staggering timescale. It asks us to imagine a scenario where 1,000 Earth years are like one spiritual year. To put that into perspective, the source is showing us the immense length and profound depth of inner remorse that a repentant spirit actually has to live through to clear its slate. It's a slow, deeply internal process of expiation, of slowly clearing that spiritual debt, and it's totally unseen by any onlookers at a welcome feast.
Let's look at how this builds our understanding of the younger son's true situation. The physical and emotional pain he already experienced, the starvation, the humiliation of the pigs, the poverty, that's entirely separate from his spiritual pain. The earthly suffering he felt during the famine is just the result of his earthly choices, and it is absolutely nothing compared to this slow, intense, inner remorse he's about to face as he works off his spiritual debt.
Which brings us to part 2, the plot twist, reassessing the older brother's reaction. Viewed through this intense new framework of spiritual cause and effect, the source text proposes a radical alternate reading of the story. According to the text, if the older brother truly stood close to the light and understood these inviolable laws of creation, he wouldn't be angry. No way. And he certainly wouldn't be jealous of a temporary earthly feast. Instead, he would feel profound pity. He would look at his younger brother and know the agonizing, long psychic cleansing experience that still lies ahead of him. He'd know his brother has to slowly and painfully earn back that forgiveness, and he wouldn't wish that terrible spiritual burden on anyone. And this leads the source to point out a pretty massive discrepancy in the gospel account. The argument goes like this. Jesus always spoke from a purely spiritual perspective, right? Because the older brother's petty anger completely contradicts how a spiritually enlightened person would react to the law of sowing and reaping. The source argues the recorded ending is entirely at odds with the laws of creation. The text posits that this ending was likely patched on later by an evangelist trying to resolve the silence about the older brother, giving folks an easy way out. But as we've seen, the father's final statement remains an unresolved, unsatisfying addition that totally fails to silence the nagging question of fairness.
All right, part 3, the true purpose, why truth-bringers came.
So, what does this all mean for us? Why does it matter? The text points out a vital logical conclusion based on these rules. Since the law of sowing and reaping is inviolable, it guarantees that humanity would eventually be forced to see the light anyway. I mean, if you touch a hot stove, you get burned, and you learn not to touch it again. Through suffering the precise consequences of our actions over time, the laws alone are enough to teach us. Therefore, the source argues, there must be a very specific reason for prophets and spiritual helpers to intervene in human affairs, expending immense effort and sometimes even their lives. I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought directly from the source's analysis. If the mechanics of the universe guarantee that we will eventually learn our lessons through the pain of our own actions, were the missions of Jesus and other truth-bringers actually acts of ultimate love designed solely to save us? Were they trying to warn us so we wouldn't have to endure that agonizing, slow, incredibly painful path of spiritual expiation that the prodigal son now faces? It's a real game changer for how we view the story. It's not a loophole for bad behavior, but a dire warning about the invisible debts we accrue. Definitely something profound to think about as we wrap up this explainer.